The scent of cheap coffee and disinfectant hung in the air, a familiar combination for any hospital cafeteria. It was 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the fluorescent lights overhead hummed a monotonous, unforgiving tune, casting long, distorted shadows across the linoleum floor. Alara traced the rim of her styrofoam cup, the warmth barely penetrating the cold dread that had settled deep in her bones. Across the small, wobbly table, Julian smiled, and it was the kindness in his eyes that was undoing her. It was a gentle, unassuming kindness, the type that didn't ask for anything in return, and it was precisely this quality that made the next few minutes feel like an execution. She had to end this. She had to do it now, before the hope he was so carelessly planting in her chest had a chance to take root. Hope, she knew, was a far more vicious thing to kill than despair. Despair was a familiar ache. Hope was a poison that made the inevitable fall hurt so much more. He was talking about his job as a landscape architect, his hands moving with a quiet passion as he described the challenge of designing a sensory garden for a local school for children with special needs. He spoke of the texture of lamb's ear, the rustle of ornamental grasses, the calming scent of lavender. He didn't seem to notice the way her own hands trembled slightly, or the way her gaze kept darting towards the exit. He was handsome in a way that wasn't immediately obvious. His dark hair was a little unruly, and there were faint laugh lines crinkling at the corners of his deep brown eyes. He wore a simple gray sweater, the left sleeve of which seemed just a little bit fuller, a little less natural in its drape, but she hadn't allowed her mind to linger on it. She had her own visible differences to contend with. Her friend Chloe had set them up. "He's a good one, Alara," she'd insisted over the phone, her voice brimming with the unshakable optimism of someone who had never had to navigate the world as a cautionary tale. "He's kind, and he won't care, I promise." But Chloe didn't understand. People always cared. They might not mean to, they might try to hide it behind polite smiles and carefully chosen words, but they always, always cared. The intricate web of scars that traced a path from her left temple, down her cheek, and across the delicate line of her jaw was not a feature one could simply overlook. It was a story written on her skin in a language everyone thought they could read. Tragedy, victim, damaged. "Ilara," Julian's voice was soft, pulling her back from the precipice of her own anxiety. "You went somewhere else for a minute there." She forced a smile that felt brittle, like dried leaves. "Sorry, just thinking." "About?" he prompted gently, his head tilted in genuine curiosity. This was it. The moment. The rip the bandage off, save everyone the trouble moment. She could let this charade go on for another 20 minutes. She could pretend to be interested in dessert, walk with him to the parking lot, and endure the awkward dance of a first-date farewell. Then she would go home and wait for the text that would never come. Or worse, the text that was so painfully, obviously, a gentle letdown. "I had a really nice time, but I don't think we're a match." The subtext was always the same. "Your face. I can't." She was so tired of the waiting, of the manufactured suspense that always ended in the same quiet heartbreak. She took a deep breath, the sterile air filling her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She looked directly into his kind, patient eyes, the eyes of a man who deserved a whole, unbroken person. "I have to be honest with you, Julian." He leaned forward slightly, his expression open, receptive. He didn't flinch. He just waited. "Okay." The words came out in a torrent, a whisper so quiet it was almost lost beneath the hum of the lights. "This has been nice. You've been nice. But I know how these things go. I've done this before, more times than I can count." Her voice began to tremble, and she hated it, hated the weakness, the vulnerability she was exposing. "It's always the same. We have a nice time, we talk, we laugh, and then nothing. I never hear from them again." She finally looked down at her hands, at the scarred knuckles that matched the story on her face. Nobody's ever stayed past the first date. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. It was the ugliest, most painful truth of her life, and she had just handed it to him, a fragile, broken thing. She braced herself for the inevitable shift in his expression, The flicker of pity, the subtle recoil, the practiced, gentle smile that was meant to soften the blow of his rejection. She waited for him to say, "Oh, I'm sure that's not true," or "You're being too hard on yourself," or some other empty platitude that would invalidate the very real, very painful pattern of her life for the last 5 years. But Julian did none of those things. The silence stretched, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It was a thoughtful silence. He didn't look away from her, not even for a second. His gaze was steady, and if she didn't know any better, she would have said it was filled with a profound and startling understanding. When he finally spoke, his voice was even softer than hers had been, a low, resonant murmur that seemed to cut through all the noise in her head. "Well," he said, a small, wry smile touching his lips, "I've always hated being predictable." He reached across the table, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His right hand, warm and calloused, gently covered hers where they rested on the cold formica. His touch was not one of pity or obligation. It was firm, grounding, a simple, declarative statement. I'm here. I am not leaving." Alara's breath hitched. She looked from his hand covering hers up to his face. The pity she had been bracing for was not there. In its place was something else, something she couldn't quite name. It looked like empathy. It looked like strength. It looked like a beginning. "I'm not going anywhere, Alara," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Unless you want me to." A single hot tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek, navigating the familiar, uneven terrain of her scars. It wasn't a tear of sadness or self-pity. It was a tear of shock, a tear of disbelief, a tear that felt, terrifyingly, like hope. For the first time in 5 years, sitting in a sterile hospital cafeteria under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights, Alara felt a flicker of something she had long ago buried and mourned. The possibility that this time, just this once, things might be different. What happened in that single quiet moment, a hand reaching across a table, a promise spoken in a near whisper, didn't just change the course of the evening. It was the gentle seismic shift that signaled that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. The hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background, the scent of coffee and antiseptic dissolving into the singular, overwhelming sensation of his skin against hers. Alara couldn't find her voice. The words she had prepared, the defensive walls she had spent years building, crumbled into dust. All she could do was stare at his hand, a lifeline in the vast, lonely ocean of her experience. His fingers were long and capable, the nails neatly trimmed, the skin roughened from his work with soil and stone. It was a hand that built things, that nurtured life from the earth, and it was resting on hers as if it belonged there. "Why?" The word escaped her lips, barely a whisper. It was the only question that mattered. Why would he be different? What could he possibly see in her that others had not? Julian didn't pull back. He didn't offer a quick, easy answer. He seemed to consider the question with the same thoughtful gravity he'd given her confession. "Because," he began, his voice low and steady, "for the last hour, you've talked about your daughter with a light in your eyes that could power a city. You told me about the volunteer work you do at the animal shelter, and you spoke about the dogs with more compassion than most people show for other humans. You have a laugh that's a little bit rusty, like it hasn't been used enough, but when it comes out, it's genuine." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And because when you look at me, you actually see me. I get the feeling that's a rare thing for you too." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't said, "Your scars don't matter." He hadn't tried to dismiss the most prominent feature of her face. Instead, he had listed the things. He did see the parts of her that she herself had forgotten to value. He saw her love for her daughter, Lily. He saw her quiet kindness. He saw the authenticity behind her guarded exterior. And in his final sentence, he had offered a piece of his own vulnerability, a hint that he, too, knew what it was like to be seen as a collection of parts rather than a whole person. My daughter, Lily," she stammered, her mind struggling to catch up. "She's 6. She's everything to me." "Tell me about her," he said, and it wasn't a polite conversational pivot. It was a genuine invitation, an offer to step onto the sacred ground of her life. And so, she did. Tentatively at first, then with a growing confidence fueled by his focused attention, she told him about Lily. She told him about her daughter's fierce love for dinosaurs, her insistence on wearing mismatched socks, and the way she hummed to herself when she was concentrating on a drawing. She described the little rituals that made up their life: Saturday morning pancakes, fort building on rainy afternoons, the nightly reading of Goodnight Moon, until the book's pages were soft as cloth. As she spoke, she felt a part of herself unfurl, a part that had been clenched tight with fear and shame. She was not just the girl with the scars. She was Lily's mother. She was a woman who had built a life, a warm and loving and fiercely protected world from the ashes of a tragedy. Julian listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone. He just listened, his expression a mixture of warmth and gentle admiration. He asked questions. What was Lily's favorite dinosaur? A velociraptor named Blue. What was the best fort they'd ever built? The one that incorporated the entire living room sofa and took over a week to dismantle. He was not just hearing her words, he was helping her rebuild her own narrative. When she finally paused, feeling a flush of embarrassment for having dominated the conversation, he just smiled. She sounds amazing, Alara. You're a wonderful mother. The compliment was so simple, so direct, it left her breathless. No one had called her a wonderful mother in years. They called her a strong woman, a survivor. They spoke of her in terms of her resilience, her ability to endure. They defined her by the fire she had walked through. Julian was defining her by the life she was nurturing. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. The cafeteria was beginning to empty out. A janitor started mopping the floor in the far corner, the rhythmic squeak of his mop a signal that their time in this strange, sterile cocoon was coming to an end. Can I walk you to your car? Julian asked, finally releasing her hand, though the warmth of his touch lingered. Yes, she said, the word coming out more firmly than she expected. I'd like that. They stood, and as he shrugged on his jacket, she saw it more clearly. The way his left arm moved with a subtle mechanical precision, the way the fabric of his sleeve didn't quite bunch at the elbow. He caught her glance, and for a fleeting second, a shadow of the same defensiveness she knew so well crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same calm acceptance. He didn't try to hide it. He just met her eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. You see me. I see you. The walk through the sprawling hospital parking garage was quiet. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and damp concrete. Their footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. It wasn't the romantic end to a first date she might have once dreamed of, but it felt more real, more substantial than any of those fantasies. It felt honest. When they reached her aging sedan, she fumbled for her keys, her fingers suddenly clumsy. She was terrified that she would say the wrong thing, that she would somehow shatter this fragile, impossible bubble of connection. He stood a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets. So, he said, breaking the silence, I know it's customary to wait a day or two. The whole 3-day rule, or whatever it is. Alara's heart sank. Here it came. The gentle brush-off. It was nice meeting you. But as I said, he continued, a playful glint in his eyes, I hate being predictable. He pulled out his phone. Would you be horribly offended if I asked you for a second date right now, maybe somewhere without fluorescent lighting and with better coffee? She stared at him, her mind blank with shock. A second date. He was asking for a second date. He was standing here, under the buzzing orange lights of a parking garage, looking at her face, at her scars, and he was asking to see her again. Yes, she finally managed, a laugh bubbling up, genuine and unrestrained. It felt wonderful. Yes, I would love that. He grinned, a wide, beautiful grin that transformed his entire face. Great. Is Friday too soon? Friday's perfect. He typed something on his phone and then looked up. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow to figure out the details. He took a step back, a small, almost shy gesture. Drive safe, Alara. You too, Julian. She watched him walk away, his stride even and sure, until he disappeared around a concrete pillar. She got into her car and sat for a long moment, her keys still in her hand, the engine off. She touched her cheek, her fingers tracing the familiar raised lines of her skin. For the first time, they didn't feel like a barrier. They didn't feel like an ending. Tonight, they had simply been a part of a story that someone had finally been willing to listen to. And as she started the car and pulled out of the parking garage, leaving the monolithic hospital behind her, she felt the undeniable, terrifying, and utterly magnificent sensation of a new chapter beginning. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and possibilities. Alara's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but her mind was racing, replaying every moment of the last 2 hours. Julian's voice, the warmth of his hand, the look in his eyes when she had laid her deepest fear bare. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the familiar wave of cynical realism to wash over her and tell her she was a fool. He's just being polite. He'll change his mind by morning. People like him don't end up with people like me. But the voice of doubt was quieter tonight, drowned out by the clear, resonant echo of his words. I'm not going anywhere. When she unlocked the door to her small second-floor apartment, the scent of cinnamon and lavender from a plug-in air freshener greeted her. It was the smell of home, of safety. The living room was dark, save for the soft glow of a dinosaur-shaped nightlight in the corner. She tiptoed to the doorway of her daughter's room. Lily was asleep, curled on her side, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Her stuffed velociraptor, Blue, was tucked firmly under her arm. A wave of love so fierce it was almost painful washed over Alara. This little girl was her reason for everything. She was the reason she got up in the morning, the reason she endured the pitying stares, the reason she had even agreed to this ridiculous blind date in the first place, because Lily deserved a happy mother, not just a surviving one. She leaned down and pressed a feather-light kiss to Lily's forehead. I'm home, sweet pea, she whispered. After changing into her pajamas, Alara sat on her sofa, the city lights twinkling through her window. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over her text messages. There was one from Chloe, sent an hour ago. Chloe. So, how's it going? Is he as great as I said? Don't scare him off. Alara sighed. Chloe meant well, she always did, but her breezy optimism often felt like it belonged to a different universe. Don't scare him off. As if Alara's very existence, her face, wasn't the thing that did the scaring. She typed a reply, her words more measured than her feelings. Alara, it was nice. He's very kind. We'll see. It was a non-committal answer, a shield. She wasn't ready to share the fragile spark of hope Julian had ignited. It felt too precious, too new. If she spoke of it, it might vanish like smoke. Meanwhile, across town, Julian was unlocking the door to his own quiet apartment. His place was neat and minimalist, filled with plants and books on architecture and botany. A large drafting table dominated one corner of the living room, covered with sketches of park layouts and intricate garden designs. He dropped his keys in a ceramic bowl by the door and shrugged off his jacket. He flexed the fingers of his left hand, the subtle whir of the motors inside the prosthetic, almost silent. He'd had it since he was 19, the result of a stupid, reckless motorcycle accident that had cost him his arm and nearly his life. For years he'd felt defined by it. The questions, the stares, the women who would touch it with a morbid curiosity or flinch away from it in discomfort. He'd learned to hide it, to wear long sleeves even in the summer, to position himself in conversations so people would focus on his right side. But Alara hadn't flinched. She had barely even seemed to register it. Her attention had been so consumed by her own perceived flaws that she had looked right past his. Or maybe, he considered, she hadn't looked past it at all. Maybe she had seen it, acknowledged it, and understood it in a way that no one else ever had. She knew what it was like to walk into a room and feel like you were leading with your history, with your damage. He thought of her confession in the cafeteria. The raw vulnerability in her voice had resonated with a part of him he kept hidden from the world. Nobody's ever stayed past the first date. He understood that feeling of preemptive rejection, of bracing for an impact you were sure was coming. He'd felt it himself, time and time again. But where his instinct was to retreat, to build walls of quiet stoicism, hers had been to lance the wound, to put the truth on the table and dare him to run. It was the bravest thing he had ever witnessed on a first date. He pulled out his phone and looked at her contact information. He'd promised to call tomorrow, but the urge to connect with her again, to reassure her that tonight was real, was overwhelming. He typed out a text, then deleted it. He typed another. Julian. Just wanted to say again that I had a really wonderful time tonight. I'm already looking forward to Friday. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the send button. Was it too much? Too eager? He thought of the fear in her eyes and hit send without another thought. To hell with the rules. The rules were for people whose lives were simple. Theirs were not. In her apartment, Alara's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She saw Julian's name on the screen, and her breath caught. She read the message once, then twice, then a third time. A wonderful time. Looking forward to Friday. It was simple, direct, and unambiguous. It was real. A slow smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes. She typed back, her fingers flying across the screen. Alara, I had a wonderful time too. And for the record, I'm glad you're not predictable. She sent the message, and then, for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to feel the pure, unadulterated thrill of anticipation. She thought about Friday. What would she wear? Where would they go? For years, first dates had been exercises in damage control, in managing expectations downward. This felt different. This felt like a beginning. And as she finally went to bed, the dinosaur nightlight casting a gentle glow across the room, she fell asleep, not with the familiar weight of dread, but with the strange, forgotten lightness of hope. The next 2 days passed in a haze of nervous excitement. Alara found herself humming as she packed Lily's lunch, a silly pop song she'd heard on the radio. At the animal shelter where she volunteered, she was more patient with the anxious, barking dogs, her own inner turmoil having quieted to a gentle thrum. Even Mrs. Gable, the perpetually grumpy shelter manager, commented on it. "You're in a good mood," she'd said, her tone more of an accusation than an observation. Alara had just smiled. Julian called on Wednesday evening, just as he'd promised. His voice on the phone was as warm and steady as it had been in person. "So, for our second date," he said, "I was thinking we could put my professional skills to the test." "Oh," Alara replied, twisting the phone cord around her finger. "Are you designing a garden for me?" He laughed, a rich, easy sound. "Not quite yet. I was thinking of the botanical gardens. It's supposed to be beautiful on Friday. We could walk around and maybe get that better cup of coffee I mentioned." It was the perfect suggestion, public but not crowded, casual but thoughtful. "That sounds lovely, Julian. There's just one thing," he said, his voice hesitant for the first time. "I was wondering, and please be honest if it's too soon, I was wondering if Lily might like to come with us." Alara was stunned into silence. He wanted to meet her daughter. On the second date. Most men ran for the hills at the mere mention of a child. They saw a package deal, a complication, a life that was already full. Julian was actively inviting that complication into their nascent connection. Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sure," he said, his tone firm and reassuring. "You told me she's everything to you. If I'm going to get to know you, I need to get to know the most important part of you. Besides," he added, a smile in his voice, "I'm told they have a pretty great dinosaur topiary in the children's garden. I thought she might appreciate that." He had remembered. He had listened to her stories about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs and filed that detail away. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. It was a sign of a man who paid attention, who cared about the small joys of the people he was with. Tears pricked her eyes. "She would love that," Alara said, her voice thick with emotion. "She would love that very much." On Friday afternoon, Alara found herself staring at her reflection with a critical eye she hadn't employed in years. She had chosen a simple, soft green sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes and a comfortable pair of jeans. She had taken extra time with her hair, letting it fall in soft waves that partially obscured the most prominent of her scars. It was a subconscious defensive gesture she had perfected over the years. Lily, however, was a whirlwind of pure excitement. She had insisted on wearing her favorite dinosaur dress, a bright yellow concoction covered in tiny, smiling T-Rexes, paired, of course, with one pink sock and one blue sock. "Is Julian going to like my dress, Mommy?" she asked, twirling in front of the full-length mirror. "He's going to love it, sweet pea," Alara said, her heart swelling. "He told me he knows all about dinosaurs." Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? Does he know about the Giganotosaurus? It's bigger than a T-Rex." "You'll have to ask him," Alara said, smiling. When the doorbell rang at precisely 1 o'clock, Alara's stomach did a nervous flip. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Julian stood there, holding a single perfect sunflower. He wasn't looking at her, though. His gaze was fixed on the small person peeking out from behind her legs. "You must be Lily," he said, crouching down so he was at her eye level. "I'm Julian. It's a pleasure to meet you. I love your dress. Is that a Tyrannosaurus Rex?" Lily, who was usually shy with strangers, stepped forward boldly. "Yes," she said, matter-of-factly. "But my favorite is the Velociraptor. They were smarter. They hunted in packs." Julian's face broke into a genuine, delighted grin. "I see I'm dealing with an expert. In that case, this must be for you." He offered the sunflower to Lily. Lily took the flower, her small hands dwarfed by its massive head, and beamed. "Thank you. It's yellow, like my dress." He then straightened up and looked at Alara, his eyes warm. "And this is for you," he said, handing her a small paper bag that smelled divine. "It's coffee, from that place I told you about." Alara's heart felt like it was going to burst. He had come with gifts for both of them. He had met her daughter on her own level, with respect and genuine interest. He had remembered her love of coffee. In 3 simple gestures, he had shown more care and thoughtfulness than she had received in years of disastrous first dates. The botanical gardens were bathed in the golden light of the autumn afternoon. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. As they walked, Lily chattered away, a constant stream of questions and observations, holding Julian's hand as if she had known him her whole life. He, in turn, listened with rapt attention, answering her questions about plants and dinosaurs with equal seriousness. Alara walked beside them, a small, quiet smile on her face. She felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling so foreign she could barely identify it. She watched the way Julian pointed out a hummingbird to Lily, the way he crouched down to examine a beetle with her, the way he never once made her feel like she was an interruption. He was including her, celebrating her, in a way that was profoundly healing for Alara to witness. They were standing by a koi pond, watching the vibrant orange and white fish swim in lazy circles when it happened. A woman with 2 young children of her own walked past. Her eyes flickered to Alara's face, and then did a classic double take. Her expression soured with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She quickly herded her own children away, whispering something to them and casting a furtive glance back at Alara. It was a scene that had played out 1,000 times in Alara's life. The stare, the whisper, the hasty retreat. The familiar shame and anger coiled in her stomach. Her smile faltered, and she instinctively raised a hand to her cheek, a gesture she hadn't made all day. But before the shame could fully take root, Julian acted. He had seen the whole exchange. Without a word, he gently took the hand she had raised to her face and laced his fingers through hers. At the same time, he used his other hand, his prosthetic hand, to point across the pond. "Hey, Lily," he said, his voice perfectly calm and cheerful, drawing her attention away from the departing family. "Do you see that big dragonfly over there, the blue one? I bet he's faster than a pterodactyl." Lily, completely oblivious to the small, cruel drama that had just unfolded, gasped with delight. "Wow, he's so shiny." Julian kept his fingers laced with Alara's, his grip firm and reassuring. He looked at her, his eyes conveying a clear message. "I saw that. It doesn't matter. We are here. They are not." He didn't make a big deal of it. He didn't confront the woman or offer Alara empty words of comfort. He simply anchored her in the present moment, in their shared reality, and refused to let the ignorance of a stranger poison it. In that moment, standing by a koi pond with her daughter chasing dragonflies and a man holding her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Alara knew. She knew that this was different. It wasn't just his kindness or his thoughtfulness or his easy way with her daughter. It was his strength. He had a quiet, unshakable core of decency that allowed him to face the ugliness of the world without flinching and to shield the people he cared about from it. He wasn't just staying past the first date, he was standing with her, a silent guardian against the ghosts of her past and the casual cruelty of the present. And for the first time, Alara let herself believe, truly and deeply believe, that he might just be the man who would stay forever. The rest of the afternoon unfolded like a dream Alara was afraid to wake from. They found the dinosaur topiary, and Lily's shriek of delight was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Julian, with the solemnity of a museum curator, gave her a detailed tour, inventing stories about the stegosaurus made of ivy and the triceratops, carved from boxwood. He and Lily fell into an easy, playful rhythm, and Alara found herself watching them, her heart a tangled mess of gratitude and disbelief. She saw the way other parkgoers looked at them, a happy, ordinary family enjoying a sunny afternoon. For a few hours, she felt normal. She felt like the woman she was supposed to be, not the one she had become after the accident. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Julian bought them ice cream from a small cart near the exit. They sat on a bench, Lily happily devouring a chocolate cone that was quickly melting all over her face and dress. "I have to confess something," Julian said, turning to Alara. He had a smear of vanilla on his nose, and she had the absurd urge to wipe it off for him. "Oh no," she said, playing along. "Are you secretly a spy for a rival botanical garden?" He chuckled. "Worse, I'm a terrible liar." He gestured with his own ice cream cone towards his left arm. "Earlier, when that woman stared, I acted like it didn't bother me, for your sake, for Lily's. But it did." Alara's playful demeanor softened. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the flicker of old hurt in his eyes. "It always does," he continued, his voice quiet. "It's been 15 years, and it still stings. The pity, the curiosity, the way people's eyes snag on it like they can't look away." He took a deep breath. "I just wanted you to know that. I get it. I'm not some saint who is above it all. It hurts. But," and here he looked directly at her, his gaze intense, "it hurts a lot less when you're not standing alone." His vulnerability was a gift. He wasn't just offering her strength, he was showing her his own scars, the ones that weren't visible on his skin. He was telling her that they were in this together, that her burdens were not hers to carry alone. "Thank you for telling me that," she said, her voice thick, "and for what you did. Anchoring me." "Always," he said, the word a simple, solid promise. The drive back to her apartment was filled with Lily's sleepy chatter from the back seat. By the time they pulled up to the curb, she was fast asleep, her head lolled to one side, the sunflower still clutched in her hand. "Looks like someone had a big day," Julian said softly, looking at her through the rearview mirror. "She did. We both did," Alara said. "Thank you, Julian, for everything." "It was my pleasure." He got out and came around to open her door, then helped her gently unbuckle a sleeping Lily. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Alara's heart skipped a beat as she watched him hold her daughter, his movements so careful and tender. He carried her up the 2 flights of stairs to the apartment, his breathing even and steady. Inside, Alara led him to Lily's room, and he laid her gently on the bed. Alara slipped off her shoes and pulled a light blanket over her. Together, they stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest in the soft glow of the dinosaur nightlight. It felt profoundly domestic, profoundly real. Back in the living room, the atmosphere was charged with a quiet intimacy. "I should probably go," he said, though he made no move toward the door. "You don't have to," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You could stay for a bit. I could make some real coffee this time." His smile was slow and warm. "I would like that very much." As Alara measured coffee grounds into the filter, her hands moving with a newfound confidence, Julian leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. The small kitchen felt full, but not crowded. It felt right. "Can I ask you something?" he said into the comfortable silence. "Anything." "The hospital cafeteria," he began, his tone gentle. "Why there? For a first date?" Alara paused, her back to him. She hadn't expected the question. She took a deep breath and turned to face him, leaning back against the opposite counter. She owed him the truth. He had earned it. Chloe, my friend who set us up, she works there. She's a nurse. She thought it would be neutral territory, easy for me. Alara gave a short, humorless laugh. But that's not the real reason I agreed to it. She looked down at her hands. I spend a lot of time at that hospital. Lily has asthma, so we're in the pediatric wing more than I'd like. And my physical therapist's office is on the 3rd floor. I go twice a week. She finally met his eyes, her own shining with unshed tears. That place, it holds a lot of pain for me, but it's also a place where I feel invisible in the right way. Nobody stares at someone with scars in a hospital. Everyone there is either sick or hurt or worried about someone who is. My face is just part of the landscape. She swallowed hard, the confession costing her more than she had anticipated. I chose it because I thought, if you can't even handle me in a place where I blend in, then there's no point. It was a test, a stupid, self-sabotaging test that I was sure you would fail. I was sure everyone would fail. Julian's expression was one of profound, heartbreaking empathy. He crossed the small space between them in 2 strides. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms. It was a simple, open invitation. Alara didn't hesitate. She stepped into his embrace and buried her face in his chest, and for the first time since the accident, she let someone else hold the weight of her sorrow. His arms wrapped around her, holding her securely. One hand rested on the small of her back, the other gently cradled her head. He smelled of fresh air and vanilla ice cream. She could feel the steady, reassuring beat of his, hard against her cheek. She didn't cry, not really. It was more of a deep, shuddering release of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The tension of years of being strong, of being the brave survivor, of never letting anyone see the cracks. With Julian, she didn't have to be strong. She just had to be. He held her for a long time, until the coffee maker sputtered its last gurgle, and the frantic beating of her own heart had slowed to match his. He didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. He just held her, providing a silent, solid sanctuary. When she finally pulled back, she felt lighter. The confession, which she had feared would scare him away, had instead brought them closer. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean to unload all of that on you." "Never be sorry for telling me the truth, Alara," he said, his voice husky. He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing against her scarred cheek without a trace of hesitation. His touch was feather-light, reverent. "You've been carrying so much, for so long. You don't have to do it alone anymore." The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long gray dream into a world of vibrant color. Autumn deepened, the leaves turning fiery shades of red and gold, and Alara felt her own life blossoming in kind. Julian became a steady, welcome presence. He was there for Saturday morning pancakes, his flipping skills far superior to hers. He was there to help Lily build an epic pillow fort that took over the entire living room, complete with a secret entrance and a drawbridge made of blankets. He was there on a Tuesday night, sitting on her worn sofa, helping her fold laundry while they watched a silly movie, his presence turning a mundane chore into a moment of quiet joy. He never pushed, never pried. He let her set the pace, learning the rhythm of her life with Lily and fitting himself into it seamlessly. He learned that Lily hated the crusts on her sandwiches, that Alara drank her coffee with exactly 1 spoonful of sugar, and that her favorite flower was the freesia because it reminded her of her grandmother. In turn, she learned that he was a surprisingly good cook, that he had a quiet, dry wit that often caught her off guard, and that he was fiercely protective of his grandfather, Arthur, the man who had raised him. One rainy Saturday, he invited them to his apartment for the first time. It was a revelation. The space was filled with light, even on a gloomy day, thanks to large windows overlooking a small park. Plants of every shape and size thrived in every corner, turning his home into a lush green oasis. Sketches and blueprints were tacked to a large corkboard, evidence of a creative mind at work. Lily was immediately captivated. "It's like a jungle," she exclaimed, her eyes wide. "That's the idea," Julian said, smiling. "Welcome to my jungle." He showed Lily his collection of exotic plants, letting her gently touch the fuzzy leaves of one and the spiky exterior of a cactus. While they were occupied, Alara found herself drawn to a series of framed photographs on a bookshelf. Most were of landscapes, dramatic coastlines, serene forests, rugged mountains. But one stood out. It was a picture of a much younger Julian, maybe 19 or 20, with his arm around an older, white-haired man with kind eyes. Julian's left arm, his real arm, was in a heavy cast. They were both smiling, but there was a shadow of pain in the younger Julian's eyes. "That's my grandfather, Arthur," Julian said, coming to stand beside her. "That was taken a few weeks after my accident." "He has a wonderful smile," Alara said softly. "He's the best man I know," Julian replied, his voice filled with affection. "He raised me after my parents. Well, after they weren't around anymore. When I had my accident, I was a mess. Angry, depressed. I thought my life was over. Arthur was the one who pulled me out of it. He's the one who encouraged me to go into landscaping. He said, 'You lost a part of yourself, kid. So go build things. Make the world more beautiful. It'll help you heal.'" Alara looked from the photograph to the man standing beside her, a man who had built a life and a career around creating beauty. "He was right," she whispered. "He usually is," Julian said with a small smile. "I'd love for you to meet him sometime. For both of you to meet him." The invitation was significant. Meeting Arthur was a step into the heart of his world, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'd like that," she said, and she meant it. Later that evening, after they had returned to their own apartment and Lily was tucked into bed, Alara found herself thinking about her own story. Julian had shared the origin of his physical and emotional scars. He had been open and honest, trusting her with his pain. She realized with a jolt that he had never once asked about hers. He had accepted her, scars and all, without needing a narrative to explain them. He had waited for her to be ready, and tonight she finally was. She found him on her small balcony, where he was looking out at the city lights. The air was cool and smelled of rain. She came to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around herself. "Julian," she said, her voice quiet. "Yeah?" He turned to her, his expression soft in the dim light. "I want to tell you," she said, her heart starting to beat a little faster. "About my scars, about what happened." He didn't say anything. He just turned his full attention to her, giving her the same patient, unwavering focus he'd given her on their first date. He created a space for her story, a safe harbor for her to finally unload the heaviest burden of all. She took a shaky breath. "It was 5 years ago. Lily was just a year old. My husband David and I were driving home from his parents' house. It was late and it was raining, just like tonight." Her voice began to tremble, but she pushed on. "A drunk driver ran a red light. He hit our car on the passenger side, my side." The memories came flooding back, sharp and brutal. The screech of tires, the impossible crunch of metal, the shattering of glass, the world turning upside down, the sudden terrifying silence that followed. "David," her voice broke and a tear slipped down her cheek. "David was killed instantly. The paramedics said he didn't suffer." She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "Lily was in her car seat in the back. She was fine. Not a scratch on her. It was a miracle. But I was trapped. The glass from the windshield, the dashboard. It's what caused all this." She gestured to her face. "I was in the hospital for weeks, multiple surgeries, skin grafts. They did the best they could." She gave a watery, self-deprecating smile. "I spent the first year in a fog of grief and pain, planning a funeral, learning to be a single parent, dealing with the physical recovery. It was a lot. When the physical pain started to fade, that's when I started to notice the other thing, the stares, the pity, the way people looked at me like I was fragile, like I was broken." She hugged herself tighter, the night air suddenly feeling much colder. "Dating was a nightmare. I thought maybe if I could find someone, I wouldn't feel so alone, but it just made it worse. Every date felt like an audition where I was doomed to fail. Every man who looked at me, I could see them imagining what I must have looked like before, the ghost of a prettier face. They couldn't see me. They could only see the tragedy." She finally looked up at him, her story laid bare, her heart exposed and trembling. "That's why I was so defensive. With you. I was so sure you would be the same. I was so sure you would leave. Julian's face was a mask of sorrow and compassion. He reached out and gently cupped her unscarred cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for the man you lost. I'm sorry for the pain you've endured. And I'm so deeply sorry for every single person who was too blind to see the incredible, beautiful, resilient woman standing in front of them." He moved his hand, his fingers now tracing the largest of her scars, the one that ran from her temple to her jaw. His touch was not clinical or curious. It was a caress. It was an act of love. "When I look at you," he said, his voice a low, intense whisper, "I don't see a tragedy. I see a survivor. I see a mother who has fought like hell to give her daughter a beautiful life. I see a woman with more strength and compassion in her little finger than most people have in their entire body." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "These aren't ugly, Alara. They're a map of a battle you won, and they are a part of you. The you that I am falling completely and irrevocably in love with." The words, "falling in love with," hung in the air between them, more real and more solid than anything she had ever known. The dam inside her broke. The tears she had held back for 5 years, tears of grief, of loneliness, of frustration, of fear, finally came. She sobbed, deep shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame, and Julian held her. He held her on that small balcony overlooking the city, under a sky washed clean by the rain, and he let her grieve. He let her break, knowing, with every fiber of his being, that he would be there to help her put the pieces back together, stronger and more whole than before. The following Sunday, the air was crisp with the promise of late autumn. Julian drove them out of the city into the rolling countryside where his grandfather lived. Arthur's house was a small, charming farmhouse, painted a cheerful blue with white trim, surrounded by sprawling gardens that were now sleeping under a blanket of mulch. A plume of wood smoke curled from the stone chimney. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Alara's hands grew clammy. This felt important. This felt like a test she desperately wanted to pass. "Don't be nervous," Julian said, sensing her anxiety as he cut the engine. He reached over and squeezed her hand. "He's going to love you." An old golden retriever with a gray muzzle lumbered off the porch to greet them, his tail thumping a steady, welcoming beat. Lily, delighted, immediately scrambled out of the car to greet him. "His name is Barnaby," Julian said, smiling. "He's about 100 years old in dog years and thinks he's a lapdog." The front door opened, and Arthur appeared. He was exactly as he looked in the photograph, tall and lean, with a full head of white hair and the same kind eyes as his grandson. He wore a flannel shirt and worn denim jeans, and he leaned slightly on a wooden cane. "There you are," he said, his voice a warm, gravelly rumble. He beamed at Julian, then his eyes moved to Alara and then to Lily, who was now hugging Barnaby with all her might. His smile widened. "Grandpa, this is Alara," Julian said, making the introduction. "And that's Lily." Arthur's gaze on Alara was direct but not scrutinizing. It was open and warm. He didn't even seem to notice her scars, or if he did, he gave no indication. He simply saw the woman his grandson had brought home. "Alara," he said, extending a hand that was weathered and strong. "It is a true pleasure to finally meet you. Julian hasn't stopped talking about you." Alara felt a blush creep up her neck as she shook his hand. "It's so wonderful to meet you too, Mr. Henderson." "Arthur, please," he insisted. "And who is this brave dinosaur?" "Tamer?" he asked, looking at Lily. Lily, hearing the word dinosaur, abandoned the dog and ran over. "I'm Lily, and I know all about the Giganotosaurus." Arthur chuckled, a deep, hearty sound. "A paleontologist? I am honored. I happen to have a fresh batch of gingerbread cookies that are shaped like fossils. Perhaps you'd like to help me excavate them." Lily's eyes went wide with wonder. "Yes." And just like that, the ice was broken. Arthur led them inside to a kitchen that smelled of ginger and wood smoke. He and Lily were instant friends, chattering about cookies and dinosaurs as if they'd known each other for years. The afternoon was one of the most peaceful Alara had experienced in a long time. They sat in comfortable armchairs by a crackling fire, drinking tea and eating the fossil-shaped cookies. Arthur told stories of Julian's childhood, embarrassing and sweet in equal measure. He spoke of his late wife, Julian's grandmother, with a love that was still palpable after all these years. He listened, truly listened, when Alara spoke about her work at the shelter and about Lily. At one point, while Julian and Lily were outside, throwing a ball for Barnaby in the yard, Alara found herself alone with Arthur. "He's a good man, my Julian," Arthur said, looking out the window at his grandson. "He's seen his share of pain. For a long time, I worried he'd closed himself off, built his walls too high." He turned his gentle gaze back to Alara. "Then he met you. I haven't seen him this happy, this whole, since before his accident." Alara's heart swelled. He's the kindest person I've ever met," she said, her voice soft. Arthur nodded, a knowing smile on his face. "Kindness is a quiet strength, isn't it? It doesn't need to shout, it just shows up." He paused, his expression growing more serious, but no less kind. "He told me what happened to you, my dear. About your husband. I'm so very sorry for your loss." Tears pricked Alara's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you." "Life has a way of breaking us," Arthur continued, his voice like a warm blanket. "But it's the light that gets in through the cracks that matters. You two, you've both got your cracks, but your light shines through so brightly, especially when you're together." His words were a balm to her soul. It was the validation she didn't even know she needed. He saw them not as two broken people clinging to each other, but as two whole people whose past sorrows had made them stronger, more compassionate, and more capable of a profound love. When it was time to leave, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple behind the hills, Arthur hugged Alara tightly. "You come back any time," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You're family now." Driving back to the city, with Lily asleep in the back seat once again, Alara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She had a place, she had a family. She reached over and placed her hand on Julian's. He immediately intertwined his fingers with hers, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "He loved you," Julian said quietly. "I loved him too," Alara replied. "And Lily is convinced he's Santa Claus's brother." Julian laughed. "Close enough." The comfortable silence settled between them again, filled with all the things that no longer needed to be said. As the city lights began to appear on the horizon, Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was home. It wasn't a place, this feeling. It was a person. It was Julian. Life settled into a beautiful, comforting rhythm. The relationship was no longer new and fragile. It was strong and deeply rooted. But as winter approached, a practical problem that had been a low hum in the back of Alara's mind grew into a source of constant, nagging anxiety. Money. She had a small life insurance payout after David's death, but most of it had been eaten up by medical bills and the lean years of single parenthood. Her part-time job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic barely covered their expenses. Their apartment was small, the rent was climbing, and she had a constant low-grade fear that one unexpected expense, a car repair, a medical bill for Lily's asthma, would send them spiraling. She tried to hide it from Julian. He had already given her so much emotionally, she couldn't bear the thought of burdening him with her financial struggles. But he was too perceptive. He noticed the way she'd stare at the grocery bill, the way her brow would furrow when an official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, he gently broached the subject. "Alara, is everything okay? You seem worried." She tried to brush it off. "Just tired. It's been a long week." He stopped wiping the counter and turned to face her, his expression serious and full of concern. "Talk to me," he said softly. "We're a team, remember?" His sincerity broke through her defenses. She sighed, slumping against the counter. "It's just money. It's always money. I feel like I'm constantly treading water, and I'm so scared of sinking." She confessed her fears about the rent, about not having a cushion, about her dream of one day giving Lily a small backyard to play in, a dream that felt impossibly far away. Julian listened without judgment, his hand resting on her arm, a silent offering of support. He didn't offer to just give her money. He knew her pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he grew thoughtful. "You're amazing with animals, Alara," he said after a moment. "I've seen you at the shelter. You have a gift, and you're so organized." "Thanks," she said, unsure where he was going with this. "My friend, Sarah," he continued, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "She runs a high-end pet-sitting and dog-walking business. It's hugely successful, but she's overwhelmed. She's been looking for a partner, someone to handle the administrative side, the scheduling, the client relations, someone she can trust. It would be a lot of work, but you could do most of it from home. The pay would be significantly better than what you're making now." Alara stared at him. "A partner? Julian, I don't have any money to invest in a business." "You wouldn't need to," he said, his excitement growing. "Your investment would be your skill, your time, your compassion. That's what Sarah needs. Let me talk to her. Let me set up a meeting. No pressure, just a conversation." Alara was hesitant, riddled with self-doubt, but the hope in Julian's eyes was contagious. She agreed. The meeting with Sarah was a success. The two women connected instantly, and Sarah was incredibly impressed with Alara's quiet competence and obvious love for animals. By the end of the week, Alara had a job offer that felt like a lifeline. It was a partnership, a real opportunity to build something for herself and Lily. It was a future. But Julian's grand gesture didn't end there. A few weeks later, on a chilly Saturday morning, he arrived at her apartment with his truck loaded with lumber, bags of soil, and dozens of small pots. "What is all this?" she asked, bewildered. "You wanted a garden for Lily," he said, a mischievous grin on his face, "so I'm bringing the garden to you." For the entire weekend, he worked tirelessly on her small, grim balcony. He measured, he sawed, he drilled. He was an artist at work, his movements precise and efficient. He built a series of beautiful tiered planter boxes that fit perfectly along the railing. He installed a vertical wall garden with pockets for herbs and flowers. He hung small solar-powered fairy lights that would twinkle on at dusk. Alara and Lily helped, painting small terracotta pots and filling them with soil. By Sunday evening, the transformation was complete. Her bleak concrete balcony had become a magical miniature oasis. There was a box for strawberries, pots for mint and basil that scented the air, and vibrant pansies that added a splash of color to the gray winter landscape. It was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just a garden, it was a testament to his love. He had listened to her whispered, impossible dream, and with his own two hands had made it a reality. That night, after Lily was asleep, they stood on the balcony, the tiny fairy lights casting a warm, magical glow. "I don't know what to say, Julian," Alara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you isn't a big enough word." "You don't have to say anything," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the city. "I told you I was falling in love with you, Alara. I was wrong." Her heart clenched. He turned her around to face him, his hands cupping her face, his gaze intense and full of a love so profound it took her breath away. "I'm not falling anymore," he said. "I'm there. I love you. Completely. With everything I am." "I love you too," she breathed, the words feeling as natural and necessary as air. And she knew it was true. She had loved him for weeks, for months, maybe even since that first night in the hospital cafeteria when he had refused to be predictable. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, soulful kiss filled with all the promises of a future she had never dared to dream of. Under the twinkling lights of the garden he had built for her, surrounded by the life they were beginning to grow together, Alara finally felt whole. The scars on her face were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were simply a part of her story, a story that was now, finally, a love story. Life became a beautiful tapestry woven from ordinary moments. Tuesday nights were for tacos and board games. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and trips to the park. Sunday evenings were for quiet dinners and cuddling on the sofa after Lily was in bed. Alara's new business venture thrived, giving her a sense of financial security and professional pride she hadn't felt in years. The balcony garden flourished, even in the encroaching cold, a constant living reminder of Julian's love. Julian was no longer a visitor in their apartment, he was a part of its fabric. His book was on the nightstand, his favorite coffee mug was in the cupboard, and his laughter echoed in the hallways. He and Lily had developed their own special bond, a unique language of inside jokes and secret handshakes. He attended her parent-teacher conferences, cheered her on at her first soccer game, and taught her how to properly plant a strawberry seedling. He wasn't just Alara's boyfriend. He was Lily's Julian. One particular Tuesday night, the air outside was cold and windy, but inside the small apartment, it was warm and bright. They had just finished dinner, and the three of them were in Lily's room for her bedtime story. Lily was tucked into bed, her cheeks flushed with sleepiness. Blue, the velociraptor, held tightly in her arms. Alara sat on one side of the bed, Julian on the other. "One more story?" Lily pleaded, her eyes wide. "One more," Alara agreed, picking up a well-worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. As Alara read the familiar words, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story, she watched Julian. He was completely captivated, not by the book, but by Lily. He watched her with an expression of such pure, unadulterated love that it made Alara's heart ache in the best possible way. He wasn't just performing the role of a potential stepfather. He loved this little girl as his own. When the story was over, Alara leaned down to kiss Lily's forehead. "Good night, my little wild thing. I love you to the moon and back." "I love you too, Mommy," Lily mumbled, her eyes already drifting shut. Then she turned her head towards Julian. "Good night, Julian." "Good night, Lily Pad," he whispered, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. As he went to stand up, Lily's small hand shot out and grabbed his. Her eyes opened slightly, a sleepy, serious look in them. "Julian?" "Yeah, sweetie." "I wish you could stay forever," she said, her voice small and drowsy. "I wish you could be my dad." The words hung in the quiet room, simple and profound. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of pure, childish truth. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Julian, whose face was a mixture of shock, awe, and overwhelming emotion. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He knelt back down beside the bed and took Lily's small hand in his. "I wish that too, Lily Pad," he said, his voice thick. "More than anything in the world." Lily smiled, a contented, sleepy smile, and her eyes closed for good. They tiptoed out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. They stood in the hallway for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Alara reached out and took his hand, her own tears now flowing freely. "She loves you so much," she whispered. "The feeling is mutual," he said, his voice choked with emotion. They moved to the living room, the space lit only by the fairy lights from the balcony. They didn't turn on any other lamps, they just sat on the sofa, side by side, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. They didn't need words. The shared experience, the profound, unscripted declaration from Lily, had said everything. After a long, comfortable silence, Julian shifted, turning to face her. He took both of her hands in his. His own hands were trembling slightly. "Alara," he began, his voice low and serious, "I had a plan. I had this whole speech worked out. I was going to take you to a fancy restaurant, maybe the botanical gardens where we had our second date. I bought a ring. It's in my sock drawer at home, waiting for the perfect moment." He let out a shaky laugh. "But that little girl in there, she just blew all my plans out of the water. Because she's right. There is no perfect moment. There's just now. There's just this real, messy, beautiful life we're building." He slid off the sofa and knelt on one knee on the worn rug in front of her. He didn't have a ring, he didn't have a speech, but he had a look in his eyes that was more precious than any diamond. "Alara," he said, his voice cracking with the depth of his love. 5 years ago, you survived something that would have destroyed most people. You built a life, you raised an incredible daughter, and you did it all on your own. You are the strongest, bravest, kindest person I have ever known. I didn't fix you, because you were never broken. You just needed someone to see the magnificent person who was there all along." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, a wide, radiant smile. "I love you," he continued. "I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love your rusty laugh. I love being a family with you and Lily. I don't want to be your boyfriend anymore. I want to be your husband. I want to be Lily's dad, officially. I want to stay forever." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Alara, will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes," she breathed, the word a sob and a laugh all at once. "Yes, of course, yes." He surged forward and she met him, their lips finding each other in a kiss that was a promise, a celebration, and a homecoming. He wasn't proposing to the girl with the scars. He was proposing to Alara, to his Alara. And in the soft, magical glow of their living room, on an ordinary Tuesday night, she finally, completely, let go of the last remnants of that girl and stepped into the brilliant, dazzling light of the woman she was always meant to be. 2 years later. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses hung in the warm summer air. Laughter, high-pitched and joyful, drifted from the backyard of a small, charming house with a blue door and a porch swing. This was their home. Not a grand mansion, but a place with enough room for a sprawling vegetable garden, a sturdy swing set, and a very happy golden retriever who was now even older and grayer around the muzzle. Alara sat on the porch swing, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the large oak tree that shaded the yard. She was wearing a simple sundress, her hair tied back loosely. The scars on her face were still there, a pale, silvery map of her past, but she no longer saw them when she looked in the mirror. She saw a wife, a mother, a business owner, a happy woman. She rested a hand on her gently rounded belly, where their son was growing, and smiled. In the yard, Julian was pushing a giggling 8-year-old Lily on the swing set. "Higher, Dad, higher!" Lily shrieked with delight. Julian laughed, the sound rich and full. Aye, Captain," he called back, giving the swing another mighty push. The word Dad had come to him as naturally as breathing, both for him to hear and for Lily to say. He was her father in every way that mattered. He had legally adopted her 6 months after the wedding, a day that had been celebrated with more happy tears than the wedding day itself. Arthur, now 91 and leaning a little more heavily on his cane, sat in a comfortable wicker chair on the lawn, Barnaby snoozing at his feet. He watched the scene with a look of deep, contented peace. This was his legacy, not the gardens he had built or the money he had saved, but this love, this family. Alara watched her husband, her daughter, her family, and her heart was so full she felt it might burst. She thought back to that night in the hospital cafeteria, to the terrified, broken woman who had been so sure she was unworthy of love. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting for her. She wished she could show her this moment, this ordinary, perfect Saturday afternoon. Julian caught her eye from across the yard and gave her a smile that was just for her, a smile that still, after all this time, made her feel like the only woman in the world. He left Lily to swing on her own and walked over to the porch, his stride easy and familiar. He sat down beside her on the swing, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. He leaned over and pressed a soft kiss to her temple, right where the largest scar began. It was a gesture he made often, a tender reclamation of the territory that had once caused her so much pain. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Just how lucky I am," she said, her voice quiet. "How one person's kindness, one unpredictable choice, can change absolutely everything." "I'm the lucky one," he countered, placing his hand over hers on her belly. He felt the baby kick. "We both are." They sat in comfortable silence, the swing moving in a gentle rhythmic creak, watching their daughter play under the benevolent gaze of the old oak tree. It was a life she had never imagined, a happiness so profound, it felt sacred. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because there was no ending. It was a beginning. It was the beautiful, ongoing, ever-unfolding story of a family built not on perfection, but on something far more powerful. Acceptance, courage, and a love that was brave enough to see past the scars and embrace the soul. The universe, in its own mysterious way, does not reward perfection. It rewards kindness. It answers courage. It bends toward the light that characters like Alara and Julian put out into the world, proving again and again that the most beautiful gardens can grow from the most broken ground. If you believe that one small act of kindness can change a life, that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, and that true love sees with the heart and not the eyes, then please let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds us of the goodness that exists in the world.